And if I look at the bio of the next speaker, see the former CEO of QuadPara Association, also, and I say a founding member, very influential in the establishing of Rolling Inspiration also, and allow me to welcome Ari Seirlis to this discussion that we have. Good morning, Ari.
Good morning, Reuben, and everybody participating in the webinar. Thanks for the privilege of being here.
Well, Ari, it's good to have you here. And thank you for the open letter that you have written in the latest edition of Rolling Inspiration. It's called The Final Straw. And I can relate to that because it's a topic very close and very near and dear to me. But tell me, why is it such an important topic to discuss?
If you have a neurogenic bladder, I would suggest, I'm not a urologist, and if a urologist or your rehab doctor has said, by emptying your bladder with a catheter on a regular basis, however that many times a day that regular is, I'm not going to prescribe that to your listeners and your viewers. Then take note, if you're going to put something into your body, I'd say you put it in only once and you throw it away. And I feel nauseous now. I'm in my 36th year as a person with a spinal cord injury, C5 quadriplegic. My bladder management shouldn't have been any different then as it is now. But of course, then there weren't such great products that there are now. And I look at how innovative a company like Coloplast have been. You know, in every couple of years, or maybe even sooner, they come out just with a better product, one that's more sterile, easier to use than the previous one. However, the concept is still one single-use catheter. Goes into your body once, empties your bladder, and you throw it away, and your bladder says, thank you very much. The minute you try and do it a second time with the same product, you're just putting yourself at absolute risk. So you asked me, Reuben, why is it so important? Well, I'd say, in my experience, a healthy bladder keeps a smile on my face and keeps a smile on your face if you're doing intermittent catheterization with your neurogenic bladder. It's a healthy bladder and a healthy bowel. Start first with the bladder. I tell you, you won't be down for a single day. And if you're not down, staying in bed with a bladder infection, the risk of a pressure sore is reduced totally. Life is good with a good bladder. Life is even better with a well irrigated or well working bowel as well. But seeing as my topic today is bladder management, keep your bladder healthy and you will remain healthy. Your kidneys will say thank you very much. And I mean, I guess I'm not a doctor again, and I'm sure George could give some support to this statement that I think your kidney only starts complaining when the bladder says, I'm not happy either. So I don't know that it's the other way around. So I'm adamant about bladder management.
Oh, Ari, thank you. That's valuable that you've mentioned there. And I heard that you mentioned about the ways of emptying your bladder. But why should we care about the single-use catheters?
Well, some of you that have been around the block with some of the clinical advisory panel talks and presentations and launches of products will have heard sort of a quote or a statement that I've made if you've been at a workshop that I've spoken in the last year or two, to say it would be unusual if you saw someone buying a Coke with a straw and then finishing your Coke, and then you just generally throw the Coke can and the straw away. I haven't seen anybody that keeps the straw and puts it in their pocket or puts it in their bag or a Tupperware, sterilizing the straw. And then next time you buy a Coke, you pull out your sterilized straw from your Tupperware and use it again. Absolute nonsense. I mean, people would look at you and say, what are you doing? Well, why do we have to succumb to that bad habit or ridiculous habit or unheard of habit of putting a catheter into our body a second time? It's probably, and it should be, against the law. I'm sure it is clinically with any other medical instrument, a needle, or anything they use in the hospital. It's a once-off product. Gloves, even a set of gloves. You don't reuse.
Yes.
So why with the bladder? And you can see, Raven, just getting me to talk about the subject makes me cross to even think that that was imposed upon us. Certainly on my life, it was imposed upon me. We were expected to use a reusable catheter. They used to have a product called a FujiCath that came in its own holder. I used one every 6 months for years. And I did get kidney damage, actually, from recurring bladder infection, at least one a month. And now I can tell you, to answer your question in one simple statement, I haven't had a bladder infection since I started using single-use catheter. I started by using a product called EasyCath from Coloplast, and I migrated to SpeedyCath, which is beautiful technology. And since I've started using Coloplast products, haven't had a bladder infection, and that is 5 or 6 years now, maybe a little bit longer.
Wow. Ari, thank you for that information. That certainly answers my question as to why we should care about single-use catheters. Thank you. What does the Storm Ferguson's win against his medical aid mean for other catheter users?
Well, that's interesting. Well done to Storm for for taking the leap of faith and having the courage. I would say, you get civil courage. That's what some of us did when we were fighting the ETOLs. We went to the streets. You get moral courage, standing by what you believe in. And then there's a new term I guess we should be using. And we, as users, those of us that have to intermittent catheterize or empty our bladders on a regular basis, we must have consumer courage. Consumer courage. And us as consumers must make sure that our medical aids don't dictate our bladder management. They reimburse our bladder management. Our doctors and medical advisors, practitioners, rehab doctors or urologists, I guess they dictate how we manage our bladder. And then we take that offering, which they've suggested, on a script and a motivation to our medical aid, and we point towards PMB, prescribed minimum benefit, which must be the appropriate use in order to keep us well and healthy, and they must reimburse us. You asked me why Storm Ferguson's case against Discovery is so significant. So now we've got a case to quote. And I would suggest that most medical aids should capitulate once they know you have this knowledge. And that's why the letter was so significant in Rolling, is because we're now publicly, not too technically, if you read the letter carefully, you've got some ammunition, and that you can be, you now must be civilly courageous, or consumally, you must be courageous as a consumer, and demand that your medical aid reimburses you the number of catheters you need per month. And I would suggest, I don't know whether we're moving on to another question or further in discussion, but if you allow me just to continue then.
Yes.
That should your medical aid still give you a percentage offering of what you should be getting in terms of numbers, or in terms of reimbursement, only reimbursing a percentage of the cost. That first thing you do is, especially if you're a member of QASA, is advise QASA of this problem, QASA as a, can take a case of a number of people forward and represent you. I've got no doubt. And I think it'll be healthy for the QASA brand, because then it puts you in the lobby and advocacy space. We've got to stand up now. We've got to stand up for ourselves. We've got to stand up for our bladders. And we've got this case now, which is a precedent to use. We must not tolerate medical aids deciding how well our bladders are by their reimbursement policies. And it's important, I guess, one person at a time. It's going to be a hell of a fight, as Storm took a few years to win this case. We must, as a collective, bank our issues, bring them to QASA. And QASA, I'm sure you've got pro bono legal services to represent members. But let's just hope that the letter and the understanding of the letter is powerful enough that a medical aid will capitulate. Now, let's talk about people that are not on medical aid. State supply. Now, medical aid say, well, if the state doesn't supply that, why should we? Well, that's just passing the buck, in my opinion. I'm sure that George could give us some more insight into some of those policies, especially that George has got a lot of influence, a lot of knowledge from his career when he was with a medical aid scheme. However, with the state, let's take the state on if we have to. Now, the state would talk about a budget. Why should a budgetary constraint affect our health and well-being? It shouldn't. And I'm asking you, Raven, to pen down now, not pencil. Put your pencil down and put your pen down and pen something to the Department of Health saying, and copy the letter. And in fact, I could almost direct you to who you need to be writing to and say, our members will be demanding bladder management if we are doing intermittent catheterization, according to the values and the knowledge of this letter and the information shared in this letter that was penned. But to be strong about the fact that our members demand, wherever you are, rural area or in a suburban area or an urban area, that we want good bladder management, not deviating from single-use catheter, if that's the way we manage our bladders. I just want to make one thing clear so that someone doesn't say, well, I don't have to, my bladder manages itself without being catheterized. Stay with that if that's what keeps your bladder empty. I'm not telling everyone to go and catheterize now if you're not. I'm saying that if you do need to catheterize, that it's using the catheter once only and throw it away. So we've got the privileged few that are on medical aids, and you've got the ammunition now, and hopefully now consumer courage. And then, of course, those of us who are not on medical aid, we really need to rise up as a group, and QASA needs to be the supporting infrastructure to say bladder management is a priority, and we demand and expect, not so much request, that there is supply and delivery and availability of single-use catheters through the state healthcare system.
Thank you so much, Ari. I just want to apologize on behalf of Raven, who's no longer with us on the session. He had some connectivity problems, so I'll just be stepping in to assist. So we do have a comment from Lee. She writes, as an OT, I totally agree that people needing catheters should not be asked to risk their health and even their life just because financial considerations cause them to compromise or go against the product technical guidelines. For people not on medical aid, the situation is really dire. I would love to know just how many spinal cord injured people in South Africa die due to preventable and treatable urinary tract infections directly connected to substandard public health systems, management, and catheterization needs. And then we also have a comment from Emma who says, thanks, Ari. We have to stand together and fight this. Bowel and bladder routines are central to our lives, dignity, and independence. We will email you private. And they talk about great presentation, so awesome. Thank you so much, Ari. And I think what the readers would also like to know is like, what are the products that you've tried out, what works for you really, really well, and if you have any other tips around single-use catheters and catheterization.
Okay, thanks for that. First of all, let me comment on, you say the first message was from, was it from Lee?
Lee Randall, yes.
Okay, Lee. Absolutely. First of all, the state won't tell you how many people died from bad bladder management as a result of state imposing reuse of catheters upon people, or just supplying them 3 or 4 a month and saying, well, that's your lot, get on with it. The interesting thing is, the state fails to do the economy and the economics of the consequences of that, because then let's take, for example, the paraplegic gets a bladder infection, lies in hospital for a few days, probably on a mattress that's not a pressure care or the correct mattress. Within a few days, he or she gets a pressure sore, and then is there, let's say, for 6 months, because then there might not be the vacuum pump therapy, or again, linen might not be changed, the correct treatment of a pressure sore might not be available, and so you're now in for a 6-month journey. Were you the breadwinner at home? Did you keep your job, or do you lose your job while you're there? There's so many consequences of that. Small bladder infection can create so many consequences that nobody even knows about. Just, oh, why is he in hospital? He's got a bladder infection. Yes, but then he got a pressure sore. Then he lost his job. Then his family or his wife or his husband left him. And something got stolen from home. The insecurities at home. The consequences are dire. You could just write a long list, almost do an algorithm of the consequences of a small bladder infection for somebody because of a result of not getting good or a good enough supply of the right catheter product for bladder management. So as you can see, again, it makes me cross to think of that. And they'll never tell you. So what they'll tell you, he or she died from a pressure sore, not because they had bladder infection and they came in for a quick treatment. Seldom happens that that treatment is quick. There are other consequences of going into a state healthcare system, I'm afraid. And I'm hoping that, you know, we can use enough influence to improve the health and the well-being of our people in state hospital facilities, and make sure that rehab centers, and I mean, there are some good state rehab centers around. I think of the Western Cape Rehab Center. It's phenomenal, but they're not every rehab center or hospital in the state hospital is like Western Cape Rehab Center. And I'm only complimenting one. I'm sure there are others that need compliments. I hope I've covered that sufficiently.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a very important note to make, that it's often not just one thing, but it's a whole sequence of events that lead up to it. So, and, you know, single-use catheters can prevent all of it. So then we have a comment from Lee again saying, I totally agree, Ari, very basic cost-benefit analysis show how ridiculous it is to not manage bladder and bowel needs appropriately, which I think you have touched on. Then we have a comment from George as well. It says, cost per individual is high, as with, for example, diabetes, but there is a much lower overall demand for single-use catheters than there is for insulin, so the overall risk is low. This is the message to state and medical aids. I don't know if you would like to comment on that.
Yeah, I think that was, thanks George for the comment, putting it into perspective. The other thing is economies of scale. You know, so the more of us that can get onto single-use catheter programs, the better the price will get, because the volumes will go up.
Yeah.
And, you know, medical aids and us as individuals can put some pressure on the supply chain to reduce the cost of the catheters, because, you know, they're doing much more volume. So I guess you know, R&D does take a lot of money. Once we increase the number of people using single-use catheters, at the same time we can put some pressure on the suppliers of these to relook at their pricing. And I have no doubt that they will, you know, if they want to be the supplier of choice. You asked me, what do I use? Well, you know, if you ask me what rugby team I support, I'm not going to be embarrassed to tell you I'm a Shark supporter. And so it's not a case of me only punting. I'm punting, if you talk rugby, I'm punting Sharks. If you talk PSL soccer, I'm a Zulu man. And in fact, they're playing against Chiefs on the weekend away. And I'll be shouting for them. However, if you talk catheters, I'm a coloplast man. Coloplast. My product, and unless someone else shows me something better, easy to use, easy to dispose of, and self-lubricated. So I'm a coloplast man, and I support the Sharks, and I support I'm a Zulu. So those are my preferences in my bladder management, in my soccer and my rugby supporting preferences.
Yes, I think we all have the things that we prefer and that we like more than others. Raven, if you would allow me, I would just like to continue. We have one more comment from Lee, a question actually. She says, do we have locally manufactured single-use catheters? If SA is dependent on importing them, that's a problem in itself. So how do you feel about Ari? Do you agree?
Well, I'm not aware of any locally manufactured single-use catheters. And valid comment or question, I'm not sure whether it's a question or a comment. Yes, well, bring it on. If there's a local manufacturer that can show us a product that looks after the urethra as well as what I'm using, this SpeedyCath, it's gentle on my urethra, then for sure, I would love to save my medical aid money. I would absolutely love to save my medical aid money. I'm not here to hurt my medical aid, but they are also not here to hurt my bladder.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think as well, the big takeaway people should have from the session is that it's beneficial both for the user and for the medical aid to be a single-use catheter user, because you have less bladder infections, which also means less hospital visits, which means less money spent for your medical aid. So I have two questions for you, Ari. I think the first is, well, it's more of a comment, but I think you can maybe expand a bit about it. You mentioned how a bladder infection could result in the person staying home, which eventually could lead to the person losing their job. And I think that's something that's very important to also highlight, is that being absent from the workplace might result in the person, you know, losing their job, and it's all because they have these issues with single-use catheters, or not with single-use catheters, but reusing single-use catheters.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. Reusing single-use catheters. I'm sure in every one of these products it says single-use. Yeah. So you're breaking the law. You're breaking the law, and in fact, we should go to the Consumer Council and say anyone that forces us to use them more than once, you know, we should have a legal issue with them. But I hope that responds to your comment. I'd like to say that once again, we need to have a bit of courage, and we need to say, we will not reuse a catheter. We will not reuse a catheter. And I don't know that I'm advocating going on the equivalent of a hunger strike, like a bladder strike. You know, we've got to be bold and say we're not reusing. And you know, I'm not saying take a health risk, but the sooner we say we will not reuse, now give me that 5 a day or 4 a day or 3 a day or 6 a day. Otherwise, I'd delay a charge against you.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah. So I think the very last question I have, and something we can just touch on quickly, is how to speak to your doctor about going onto a single-use catheter, because I feel like often the individual knows more about this maybe than their general GP. So maybe give us some advice or feedback on that.
Wow, that's an interesting comment. Wow, sensitive. Yes, I do think that us people with spinal cord injury tend to learn very quickly about bladder management. And where do we learn that from? From our peers, from other quads and paras who are looking healthier, feeling healthier, more active than us, or us being more active than them. How are you doing it? Well, I empty my bladder with a catheter every couple of hours, and I don't reuse. Wow, okay. And you go to your GP, who might not have heard about that, and said, "Hey, GP, I can't continue using this reusable catheter." Wow, okay. So GPs especially, I'm sure urologists, I mean, it should be a no-brainer for urologists. But a lot of GPs are ignorant, not because they are ignorant people, but maybe ignorant of the information out there that supports the clinical evidence. And there is clinical evidence now that was published in the South African Medical Journal on single-use catheter, the benefit of it. So the evidence is there and the information is there. So guide them to the clinical evidence. And QASA's got that on hand. And it's published in the on the SASCO website, that particular insert in the SA Medical Journal. And so you can refer your GP to the SASCO website, Southern African Spinal Cord Association, to find that information. And there you go. Don't argue against finite clinical evidence that's been published.
Yes, great. Thank you so much, Ari. Just the last comment from my side. I just want to make everybody aware that the article that Ari wrote about single-use catheters and medical aids is actually free to access on our websites. Most of our content is actually behind a pay door, just to make sure that we, actually make some money and support the publication and its employees. But we've actually made this article free for everyone to access because we feel it's such an important topic and so important for our readers to also just learn about this, know about this, and be able to access the correct products for them.